Don't mind her. The coward who ran away when the company was going bankrupt is probably only fit to scrub toilets and leech off my family now. The shrill laughter of my younger sister Maya and her upper crust friends pierced the air. I am Grace Burke. For 18 grueling years, I swallowed the label of being the family's disgrace. They never knew that the business empire Maya was currently standing on to feed her arrogance had actually been bought back with $3 million of blood money and my countless brushes with death-dismantling chemical bombs. I suppressed my anger, bending over to reach up and adjust the tiara for my precious sister. But a mistake happened. My silk sleeve slipped down. A jagged raw patch of red flesh, severely burned by white phosphorus, was laid bare. Crash. The crystal glass in Lucas Vance's hand, the powerful director of security for my future in-laws, shattered into pieces. The cold face of the former Green Beret suddenly went as white as a corpse. Amidst dozens of horrified eyes from the ultra-rich, the man who breathed fire suddenly stumbled backward, grinding out every trembling word. Hazard 21. 11 lives. Why do you have that scar? His question dropped an invisible bomb right into the middle of the luxurious glass cage, shattering 18 years of lies and dragging all of us into a dead silence right there on the glass-covered floor. The VIP fitting room plunged into a total vacuum. A dead, suffocating space. I didn't flinch. Years of hard conditioning had burned the startle reflex right out of my nervous system. Loud noises didn't make me jump anymore. They made me freeze. They made me assess the room. I calmly pulled my silk sleeve back down. I made sure the cuff completely covered the dead melted skin wrapping around my left wrist. Lucas kept stumbling backward. His broad chest heaved up and down in erratic, jagged motions. His eyes were completely locked on my forearm, wide and completely hollowed out by whatever ghosts he was seeing. Maya didn't look at Lucas. She didn't look at my arm. She just glared down at the dark puddle of red wine rapidly soaking into the pristine white wool rug. Her jaw tightened, the muscles ticking under her heavy makeup. She jerked her chin toward the corner of the room, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Clean it up, it splashed on my dress," Maya hissed. Her voice was thin and sharp, scraping against the silence like a rusty nail on glass. Chloe and the rest of the bridesmaids immediately shuffled backward. Their expensive heels clicked frantically against the marble. They were desperate to keep the alcohol away from their custom gowns. Not a single person in that room gave a damn about the name Hazard 21. To them, the trembling words of a security guy meant absolutely nothing compared to a stained haute couture hemline. I was still just the stain on their perfect day. The ungrateful burden. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just slowly lowered my knees onto the freezing stone floor. The cold seeped right through my cheap slacks, settling deep into my aching joints. The stench of pure alcohol rose from the spilled wine. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating under the harsh, blinding glare of the overhead chandelier. I reached out. My fingers moved systematically, gathering the shattered crystal shards from the puddle. One by one. No wasted movement, no hesitation. A jagged piece of crystal sliced deep into my index finger. I felt the sharp, hot sting tear through the calluses on my palm. A thick drop of blood welled up instantly. It dripped off my knuckle, falling down and blending seamlessly with the dark red puddle on the floor. My blood. Their spilled wine. It all looked the exact same down here in the dirt. I forced my breathing down. 12 breaths a minute. In. Out. I kept my face entirely blank. I was a maid to them. A ghost kneeling in the wreckage of their careless celebration. I looked up, my eyes sweeping the room. Lucas had already turned his back on the crowd. The massive man shoved the heavy glass doors of the boutique open so hard the metal hinges groaned in protest. He hit the pavement outside, digging frantically into his suit jacket. He pulled out a heavy satellite phone. His hands were shaking violently. He dialed fast, pacing the sidewalk with the frantic, jerky movements of a man calling in a massive favor. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the metal trash can in the corner of the room and opened my bloody hand. I let the handful of broken crystal fall. Clink, clatter. The hollow, dry sound echoed off the high walls, cutting through the heavy tension. I grabbed a dry towel off a nearby counter, pressing it hard against my bleeding finger to stop the flow. As I turned back around, my eyes caught a reflection in the three-way floor mirror. Richard Burke, my father. He had backed himself entirely out of the spotlight, pressing his heavy frame deep into the corner of the velvet sofa. Both of his hands were wrapped so tightly around the gold handle of his cane that his knuckles were bone white. His expensive tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. The arrogant CEO who bought his way into this elite circle was completely gone. The skin around his mouth sagged. His face was pale damp with a sudden cold sweat that made him look a decade older. He wasn't looking at the blood on my hand. He wasn't looking at the sleeve I had just rolled down. He was staring blindly into the empty space in front of him. His breathing was shallow and rapid. It was the pathetic look of a man who just realized the floorboards were rotting beneath his feet. He knew. He knew the massive unspoken lie of the last 18 years was finally breathing right down his neck. Afghanistan, 2014. The heat rising from the cracked dirt was suffocating. 3,000 degrees of pure white-hot hell. The secondary explosive blew sideways. The flames latched onto my left sleeve instantly. Phosphorus. It doesn't stop burning. Behind me, trapped in the narrow, crumbling hallway, were 11 men. Green berets, blocked in, nowhere to move. I didn't think. I slammed my knee down hard onto my own smoking arm, pinning the burning fabric to the dirt. I locked my jaw. The smell of melting skin filled my nose. My right hand moved fast, digging into the wires. I gripped the thickest one and cut it clean. The low hum stopped. Darkness crashed down. The last thing I heard before passing out was Lucas screaming my name. For 11 months, the burn unit at Walter Reed was my entire world. The air always smelled like heavy tar and harsh antiseptic. The doctors shaved thin sheets of skin from my thigh and grafted them over the blackened, ruined meat of my wrist. Every single Sunday, a nurse handed me a small roll of medical gauze. My only job was to squeeze it, to force the stiff, deadened tendons to stretch 1 agonizing millimeter at a time. I didn't take the extra morphine. I needed the sharp, stabbing pain. It kept my head clear. It kept me awake long enough to log into a secure terminal and check the wire transfers. I made sure every single hazard pay deposit hit the blind trust in New York. The debt was shrinking. My arm was ruined, but the numbers were going down. One Sunday morning, I managed to dial home. I couldn't hold the heavy plastic receiver, so I hit the speaker button. Eleanor picked up on the 3rd ring. She didn't ask how I was sleeping. She didn't ask if I could feed myself. She complained. For 20 straight minutes. Her thin, shrill voice echoed off the sterile white tiles of my hospital room. I swear, Grace, you can't trust anyone to do a simple job anymore. Eleanor whined, the sound grating like sandpaper. That idiot girl at the dry cleaner completely scratched the hardware on Maya's Hermes bag, the Kelly bag. Do you know how long I was on a wait list for that thing? It's ruined. I lay there staring at the ceiling. The fresh gauze wrapped around my left arm was already spotted with red, blood oozing through the white cotton. I bit down on the inside of my lip, tasting copper just to keep my face perfectly still. I'm fine, I said flatly to the empty room. Thanks for asking. Summer 2015. I stood at the bottom of the long sweeping driveway. The Burke mansion looked exactly the same. Perfect hedges, a freshly paved circular drive. I was carrying the same cheap faded canvas bag I had left with. I had dropped nearly 20 pounds. My clothes hung off my frame like loose rags. My left sleeve was tightly buttoned all the way down to my knuckles. Maya walked out onto the top step of the marble porch. She was wearing a crisp white tennis skirt and expensive sunglasses. She had just gotten back from a resort trip in Aspen. She looked down at me, pausing halfway through a sip of her iced latte. She wrinkled her nose, visibly disgusted. She actually lifted a hand to cover her mouth, stepping back slightly, as if I smelled like garbage. God, you look disgusting, Maya sneered, looking me up and down. What have you even been doing? Scrubbing toilets, sweeping trash off the highway? You look like a total wreck. I didn't drop my bag. I didn't try to walk up the steps. I just tilted my head up, looking straight through her expensive shades. Workplace accident, I said. Maya threw her head back and laughed. A loud, sharp, ringing laugh that echoed off the massive stone pillars of the house I had just bought back for them. Friday night. The heavy polished oak doors to the main dining room were closed tight. The Burke family was hosting the Vance family for the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't invited. I was standing in the massive cold marble kitchen looking down at a bowl of lukewarm soup. A thick, unappetizing layer of white grease had already hardened across the top. Loud bursts of laughter echoed through the thick wooden doors. I could hear Ethan Vance's smooth, confident voice. I could hear Maya's high-pitched giggles, the clinking of heavy crystal glasses, the sound of people celebrating a perfect, wealthy union. I pushed the soup bowl away. I grabbed a plain glass, filled it with tap water, and leaned back against the edge of the stainless steel sink. The kitchen was freezing. I took a slow sip, letting the cold water slide down my throat. On the stainless steel door of the oversized refrigerator, a large piece of heavy cardstock was pinned under a magnetic clip. It was the wedding seating chart. Table number 1, the VIP table. Richard, Eleanor, Maya, Ethan, and Lucas Vance. The absolute center of attention. I traced my finger down the list, past the extended family, past the wealthy business partners, down to the very bottom right corner. Table 15, the designated spot for event staff, third-tier vendors, and the wedding planner's assistants. It was placed right next to the swinging kitchen doors. My name was written there in cheap blue ink. Underneath it, someone had violently scribbled out the original table assignment with hard, jagged strokes. Maya had personally gone through the chart, scratching my name out and moving me as far into the shadows as physically possible. To them, I wasn't a sister. I was a stain they were desperately trying to scrub out before the guests arrived. I left the kitchen and walked up the narrow back staircase to the attic room. It was a small, dusty space shoved under the sloping roof. I knelt on the bare floorboards and pulled a locked, heavy-duty black case from under the tiny bed. I punched in the code. The latches popped open with a dull, heavy click. Nestled deep inside the black foam was a small velvet box. I opened it. The silver star rested quietly against the dark fabric. The metal was dull in the dim light of the single overhead bulb. I didn't take it out. I just pressed my right thumb hard against the cold, jagged edge of the star. It was a heavy, silent piece of metal. Proof of blood. Proof of a debt paid. I ran my thumb over it one last time, snapped the velvet box shut, and shoved the heavy case back into the darkest, deepest corner of the small closet. I locked the door. I turned around. A bright yellow sticky note was plastered right in the middle of my bedroom door. Maya's loopy, aggressive handwriting stared back at me. Follow me tomorrow morning and carry my bags. Don't embarrass this family. I reached out, ripped the yellow paper off the wood, and crushed it into a tight ball. I threw it in the trash. I walked over to the corner and pulled out the heavy industrial steamer. I plugged it in. The machine hissed and spit, shooting thick clouds of boiling hot steam into the cramped room. For 2 straight hours, I stood there. The air grew thick and suffocating. Sweat dripped down the back of my neck. I held the nozzle steady, slowly running the blistering steam up and down the endless yards of expensive silk and chiffon wrapped around Maya's custom dress. I didn't stop. I didn't rush. I ironed out every single tiny wrinkle, moving with slow mechanical precision. It was a job. You finish the job no matter how brutal the conditions, even if the job was serving the enemy. When the dress was perfectly smooth, I hung it up. I walked over to the small mirror. I reached down to my left wrist. I pulled the long silk sleeve all the way down, burying the jagged red flesh deep beneath the fabric. I slowly fastened the tiny pearl button, locking it tight. I turned off the light. Tomorrow morning, we were going to the boutique. Saturday morning. Boutique. Madame Celine was suffocating. The air was thick with the overpowering smell of French roses and the high-pitched echoing squeals of wealthy bridesmaids. Maya stood right in the center of the 3-way mirror platform. The harsh, bright white halogen lights beat down on her, catching every single crystal sewn into the heavy train of her dress. She was talking loud, non-stop, bragging to the room about a recent corporate merger, proudly calling herself the great mind behind Burke Innovation's latest success. Down on the floor at the base of the platform, I was kneeling. The rough, stiff layers of tulle scraped against my knuckles. I held a handful of silver pins, pressing them firmly into the thick fabric to fix an uneven hemline. I didn't listen to Maya's voice. I blocked it out. I just focused on the slow, steady rhythm of my own breathing. In, out. 12 breaths a minute. A waiter in a crisp white shirt stepped into the circle carrying a silver tray. Pop. The loud crack of a champagne cork echoed sharply. Chloe Jenkins, the company's PR director, grabbed a crystal flute. She took a slow sip, her eyes dropping down to look at my faded, outdated slacks. So Grace Chloe started, her voice dripping with poison. What kind of low-level job are you doing to survive these days? Haven't seen you around the corporate office in, well, ever. Maya flipped a perfectly curled lock of hair over her shoulder. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut straight through the room. Don't mind her. The coward who ran away when the company was going bankrupt is probably only fit to scrub toilets and leech off my family now. The bridesmaids covered their mouths, giggling loudly. Tiffany Brooks whispered something cruel about the cheap fabric of my shirt. From the velvet sofa across the room, Richard Burke slowly swirled the champagne in his glass. My father. The man whose company and reputation I had bought back with pieces of my own flesh. He let out a deep, booming laugh, leaning forward slightly. Grace, sweetheart, Richard chuckled, playing the generous patriarch. If you're really that broke, just tell me. I can get you a job as a janitor in the lobby. This family always has a spare bowl of rice for its own. The room erupted into laughter again. The thief playing the savior. I stopped pinning the hem. My jaw locked tight. I stared at the polished floorboards. I had given up my college, my skin, and my future for that man sitting on the velvet couch. And right now he was using me as a punchline to impress a room full of shallow girls. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I pushed myself up from the hard floor, my knees popping softly. Maya turned slightly, her crystal tiara slipping to the side. I took a deep breath. I raised my left arm high, stretching to fix the silver crown on her head. The angle was too wide. The tiny pearl button holding my left cuff together snapped. The thick silk sleeve immediately slid all the way down past my elbow. The harsh, blinding white light of the boutique hit the jagged, red, melted mass of dead tissue on my forearm. Crash. The laughter died instantly. The crystal glass in Lucas Vance's hand hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 pieces. The powerful, massive security director shot to his feet. His face went dead white. He stumbled backward, staring at my arm as his voice cracked out a ragged, trembling whisper. Hazard 21. Lucas Vance shoved the heavy glass door of the boutique open and bolted out onto the sidewalk. For 3 seconds, the boutique fell into complete, suffocating silence. The cold air blasting from the overhead vents suddenly felt freezing. Then, Maya exploded. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She didn't ask how I got a scar that looked like melted wax and ruined meat. Her expensive heels slammed heavily against the marble floor as she stormed over. She grabbed my upper arm. Hard. Her sharp red-painted acrylic nails dug deep through the cheap fabric of my shirt, biting directly into my skin. What the hell kind of psycho stunt did you just pull in front of my future brother-in-law? Maya hissed. Her voice was shaking with pure, selfish rage. What is that disgusting thing on your arm? You better march out there right now and tell him it's a boiling water burn. Do not embarrass me. She only cared about the optics, the prenuptial contract, the wealthy in-laws. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. Then I shoved her off. It wasn't a push. It was a hard, precise deflection. Maya stumbled backward, her heavy crystal-beaded train tangling around her ankles. She caught herself on the edge of the velvet sofa, gasping in shock. I didn't yell back. I just raised my left arm. Using my right hand, I slowly pulled the edges of the silk cuff together and fastened the tiny pearl button. I locked my eyes dead onto Maya's face. It wasn't an angry look. It was completely hollow. The cold, mechanical stare of someone who had survived things she couldn't even comprehend. Chloe and the rest of the bridesmaids immediately shrank back. They huddled together near the clothing racks, shivering under the sudden, heavy pressure radiating across the room. They had just called me a toilet scrubber. Now they couldn't even look me in the eye. Richard Burke stepped forward. The fake, generous smile was entirely gone from his face. He grabbed the thick velvet curtains hanging by the front window and yanked them shut, blocking out the street. He turned to Madame Celine, jerking his head toward the back room. "Get your staff out of here." Now, Richard barked. The boutique owner scurried away, dragging her assistants with her. Richard turned his glare on me. The veins in his neck were bulging. "Grace, you are ruining everything I built. Everything." I pulled a small leather chair away from the wall and sat down right in the middle of the mess. I unclasped the heavy dark metal watch from my right wrist and placed it flat on the glass coffee table. I didn't answer him. I just watched the second hand. Tick, tick, tick. For 18 long minutes, the room was a pressure cooker of toxic panic. Maya paced the floor, crying about her ruined morning and screaming at me to leave. Richard threatened to cut off my non-existent inheritance. Eleanor, who had just walked in from the parking lot, started wailing about how the Vance family would cancel the wedding if they thought bad genetics caused that ugly scar. I sat perfectly still, my back straight, my hands resting flat on my knees, breathing in, breathing out, 12 times a minute, letting them choke on their own desperate hollow noise. Minute 18. A sound ripped through the thick, suffocating air of the boutique. The high-pitched, violent screech of heavy rubber burning against asphalt. It was ear-splitting. 3 massive black-armored SUVs jumped the curb outside, slamming on their brakes directly in front of the boutique's drawn curtains. The heavy doors clicked open simultaneously. 3 men stepped out onto the pavement. They were wearing dark, expensive suits, but they didn't move like businessmen. They moved with hard, precise, mechanical efficiency. The heavy glass doors of the boutique were suddenly shoved wide open. The cold outside air rushed in, carrying the distinct heavy smell of burning rubber and absolute authority. The heavy glass doors of boutique Madame Celine were shoved open. 3 massive shadows blocked out the harsh white light from the street. Lucas Vance walked in first. The heavy dark wood and rich leather smell of their tailored coats immediately choked out the cheap, sweet stench of French roses inside the room. Following closely behind him was Robert Sterling, a logistics billionaire. Next to him was Dr. Julian Hayes, one of the top trauma surgeons on the East Coast. Richard Burke's personal bodyguard stepped forward, raising a hand. Robert didn't even look at him. He swiped the guard's arm away like swatting a dead branch. The 3 men walked right over the torn layers of tulle, right over the spilled champagne, and stopped dead in front of the small leather chair where I was sitting. Julian moved first. The famous surgeon dropped straight to one knee on the hard marble floor. He didn't care about his custom suit. His hands, the ones insured for millions of dollars, were shaking violently. He stared down at my left arm, his voice completely broken, scraping out of a tight throat. Hazard 21. 12 years. Julian choked out, his eyes wet. 11 of us. We spent 12 years tearing through redacted files, trying to find you. Robert Sterling stood like a brick wall behind him. His cold, sharp eyes scanned the jagged red scar on my forearm. He didn't speak. He just gave Lucas one single, slow nod. A nod that carried the heavy, undeniable weight of 11 human lives. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I uncrossed my legs and stood up slowly. I squared my shoulders, keeping my back perfectly straight, and offered a single respectful nod back to them. Lucas spun around. He pointed a thick, heavy finger straight into Maya's face. Maya froze. The heavy crystal tiara on her head had slipped sideways, pulling her hair extensions down with it. She looked ridiculous, pathetic. In 2014, my men were trapped inside a collapsing factory. Lucas growled, his voice vibrating off the walls like thunder. A chemical bomb went off. The woman standing right there used her bare hands to pin down a phosphorus fire. She burned her own flesh to the bone just to cut the wires and pull 11 of us out alive. Lucas took a slow, heavy step forward. Maya flinched, shrinking back against the mirrors. I am the man who held on to her bloody shirt while the medevac chopper pulled us out. Lucas spat, his voice dropping into a low, lethal register. And you just called the woman who saved my life a toilet scrubber. Crash. Chloe Jenkins dropped her champagne glass. It hit the floor, scattering more broken crystal across the rug. None of the bridesmaids moved. They were entirely paralyzed, their mouths hanging open in pure, terrified silence. Richard Burke tried to speak. His jaw opened, but nothing came out. The arrogant patriarch was completely suffocated by the sudden crushing shift in power. Robert Sterling stepped right into Richard's personal space. He looked down at the pale, sweating CEO with absolute disgust. "You have a great daughter," Burke Robert said. His voice was freezing cold. "It's a damn shame this family's completely blind." I didn't wait for Richard to answer. I reached down, grabbed my cheap canvas bag off the floor, and strapped it over my shoulder. I didn't look at Maya. I didn't look at my father. I just walked straight through the wreckage of the boutique, keeping my pace steady, and walked out the front door with the three men right behind me. Sunday night. The grand living room of the Burke mansion was freezing. The central air conditioning blasted a steady icy current over the three people huddled together on the expensive Italian leather sofa. Richard, Eleanor, and Maya sat close together. They didn't look like wealthy elites anymore. They looked like gamblers who had just lost the deed to their house. The arrogant masks had been ripped clean off. Richard clamped his teeth down on a thick Havana cigar. He hadn't lit it. His hands were shaking too much. He tried to force his shoulders back, desperately clinging to the last shredded pieces of his authority. "You've humiliated this family enough," Grace Richard growled, his voice tight. "What exactly are you trying to do here?" I didn't answer him. I reached into my canvas bag. I pulled out a heavy, thick manila folder and slammed it down onto the tempered glass coffee table. Smack. The sharp cracking sound echoed through the high ceilings. I pushed the folder across the glass. The cover flipped open. Pages and pages of bank statements, wire transfers, blind trust deposits stretching back 9 years. The bold black ink stamped at the top of every page hit Richard's eyes. Sign-on bonus, hazard pay, disability compensation. "You always loved to brag," I said. My voice was completely flat. "You loved telling the country club how you pulled this company out of the ashes with your bare hands. You lied." Eleanor leaned forward, squinting at the papers. Her jaw slowly dropped open. "Look closely at these dates," I said, tapping a scarred finger against the glass. "That invisible $3 million debt 18 years ago. No angel investor saved you. It was paid off with my blood money. You didn't build this empire. You built it right on top of my burned skin." Richard stopped breathing. The unlit Havana cigar slipped from between his teeth. It hit the edge of the glass table and tumbled onto the thick rug, leaving a trail of loose, dry tobacco. His broad chest collapsed inward. The great untouchable CEO shattered into dust right in front of me. Eleanor covered her face with both hands. She started sobbing loudly. But it wasn't guilt. She wasn't crying because I got hurt. She was crying because the shiny fake glass house she lived in had just been smashed to pieces. There is no better feeling than the exact moment you drop the receipts on the table and watch the people who gaslit. You realize they can't lie anymore. If you have ever had to pull out the hard proof to shut down a toxic family member, you know exactly how cold and liberating this silence feels. Please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop the word truth in the comments below. Let's celebrate the moment the mask finally falls off. Maya jumped up from the sofa. Her face was red, twisted in an ugly, desperate panic. "You did this on purpose," Maya screamed, pointing a shaking acrylic nail at me. "You set me up. You made a fool out of me in front of the Vances just to ruin my wedding." I didn't flinch. I took 2 slow steps forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing right in her face. She stopped screaming, her breath hitching in her throat. "Keep your mouth shut," I whispered, dropping my voice down to a low, freezing hum. "The wedding is in 6 days. If you say one single word about this, if you try to use my name to spin some PR garbage to save your image, I will pull the financial plug. I will tear this empire down twice as fast as I saved it." Maya's knees buckled. She dropped back onto the sofa, staring up at me in absolute paralyzing fear. Tuesday afternoon. The heavy oak doors of the Vance family study were shut tight. Ethan Vance stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw locked. He wasn't looking at Maya like she was a prize anymore. He looked at her like she was a bad investment. "You called the woman who saved my brother's life a toilet scrubber." Ethan's voice was completely dead, stripped of all warmth. "You and your father built your entire ego on the blood of your own family. That's what I'm marrying into." Maya sat frozen in the leather chair. She didn't dare look up. The sharp, unforgiving criticism from the successful lawyer cut right through her. For the first time in her life, her beauty, Her expensive clothes and her manipulative crying meant absolutely nothing. Wednesday night. Maya sat alone in the dark. The pale, sickly blue light from her laptop screen washed over her face. Her makeup was entirely wiped off. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands were shaking violently as she typed a single string of words into the Pentagon's public archive directory. Hazard 21. She hit enter. A digital commendation file loaded on the screen. There was no picture, just a block of heavy black text detailing a chemical fire in a collapsed building. With her uniform melting into her skin, she pinned the burning explosive down to sever the final wire, preventing the immediate death of 11 men. Maya read the same sentence over and over again. Dozens of times. The thick, arrogant shell she had worn for 18 years cracked and shattered into pieces on the floor of her bedroom. The vice president of marketing title she paraded around suddenly felt like a cheap plastic toy. She realized exactly what she was. A parasite. Thursday morning, a soft, hesitant knock on my bedroom door. I opened it. Maya stood in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her face was bare, splotchy, and her eyes were completely bloodshot from crying all night. "Can you?" Maya choked a loud sob, catching in her throat. "Can you just tell me exactly what happened, please?" I stepped back, letting her into the small room. I poured a glass of tap water and set it on the nightstand. I didn't hold her hand. I just sat on the edge of the bed and told her. I spoke in a slow, flat, mechanical voice. I detailed the heat of the phosphorus, the smell of the burning uniform, the 11 months staring at the white ceiling in the hospital. I didn't sound angry. I didn't sound sad. Maya dropped her head onto the edge of my small desk and started sobbing hysterically. Her shoulders heaved up and down. I just watched her. I didn't reach out to pat her back. I didn't tell her it was okay. I was checking the load-bearing capacity of her sudden guilt. After 10 minutes, Maya slowly pushed herself up. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, looking around the room. She awkwardly picked up my empty water glass and a dirty coffee mug from the desk, walking over to the small sink in the corner. She washed them. She was terrible at it. Thick streaks of white dish soap clung to the rims of the glasses. When she couldn't find a towel, she didn't ask. She just grabbed the bottom edge of her expensive designer silk blouse and clumsily wiped the wet glass dry. I didn't stop her. Thursday afternoon. I walked past the kitchen. Maya was standing quietly in front of the stainless steel refrigerator. The large seating chart for the wedding was still pinned under the magnet. Maya held a black marker. Her hand was trembling, but she pressed the tip down hard. She dragged a thick dark line straight through the name of a billionaire CEO sitting at table number 1. Then, right next to Lucas Vance, in the most powerful seat in the entire room, she carefully wrote out 2 words. Grace Burke. The 5-star hotel ballroom was blindingly bright. Thousands of crystal pendants on the chandeliers threw harsh white light over the crowd. The air smelled of expensive roasted meat and heavy perfume. Maya stood next to a massive 7-tier wedding cake. She held a black microphone. Her hands were shaking violently, making the heavy diamond ring on her finger catch the glaring light. The jazz band stopped playing. The ballroom went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. "I need to thank someone who has been standing in the dark," Maya said. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out through the massive speakers. "Someone who cleaned up every single piece of wreckage I ever caused. She carried the weight of this family's future, and she paid for it with her own blood. Everything I have today is a handout from her." Maya turned away from the crowd. She looked directly at me. Then she bent forward, bowing a deep 90 degrees in her heavy custom dress. The room stayed completely silent. An hour later, Richard Burke walked over to where I was standing. The arrogant, untouchable CEO was completely gone. His shoulders were hunched. The skin under his eyes looked thin, gray, and exhausted. He stood there for a long time, staring at the polished wood floor before he could finally look me in the eye. "I told the wrong story about you for a decade," Richard whispered. His voice was hollow, stripped of its usual booming authority. "I don't deserve to sit in the big chair. And I sure as hell don't deserve to be your father." I looked at him. I gave a single short nod. I accepted the apology, but I didn't stand closer. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer him a hug. Some glass once shattered on a marble floor can never be glued back together. You just sweep it up, throw it in the trash, and walk away. I turned my back and walked to my seat. Table number 1. The absolute center of the room. Lucas Vance sat next to me. Across from him were Robert Sterling and Julian Hayes. Lucas reached into his tailored jacket. He pulled out a heavy matte black card and slid it across the white tablecloth. I placed my fingertips on the surface. 11 names were embossed deep into the thick paper. Nobody stood up to give a loud speech. Nobody clinked a silver fork against a champagne flute. Lucas picked up his heavy crystal tumbler. Robert and Julian did the exact same thing. Moving in perfect silent unison, the men lifted their glasses exactly 1 inch off the table. They held them there, hovering perfectly still, just above the white linen. I picked up my glass of ice water. I lifted it 1 inch. A quiet, unbroken respect. The only kind that mattered. I set the glass down. I reached across with my right hand and grabbed the pearl button on my left wrist. I snapped it open. I rolled the expensive silk fabric up once, then twice. I pushed it entirely past my elbow. The jagged raw red scar was completely exposed. The bright chandelier light hit the melted, uneven flesh. I didn't hide it. I rested my forearm flat on the white cloth, letting the cool air of the ballroom wash over the ruined skin. Nobody in the room dared to look away in disgust. There was nothing but absolute, crushing respect. Sunday morning. The air outside was crisp and freezing. I walked down the long paved circular driveway of the Burke mansion. My heavy canvas bag dug firmly into my right shoulder. The massive stone house stood quietly behind me. It wasn't my prison anymore. I didn't turn my head to look back. I just kept walking straight down the road. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I appreciate every single one of you for spending your time with me. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.